And welcome back to the John Fredericks Show. This is your guest host, Senator Bryce Reeves, along with Mark Snee Savage. It's my pleasure to welcome someone to the show that hadn't been on, but you see him quite often on Fox News as a contributor or a guest frequently on many of the programs on Fox. He is the chairman of GOPAC, and if you're not sure what GOPAC is. If you remember back in '94, Newt Gingrich took back Congress, and he did that with an organization called GOPAC, originally founded by one of the Pete DuPont. And GOPAC is one of the premier educating and electing a new generation of Republican leaders. Welcome to the show, Mr. David Avella. David, good morning.
Good morning, Bryce.
So you're up bright and early. Many of our listeners probably don't know that you get up every morning, and you have a thing where you always say one thing most people don't know. So I'm going to tell our listeners one thing they probably can't read on your bio. If you pull up GOPAC and you look at all of David's speeches and times he's been on, and Fox and various things, MSNBC and all the other shows. But one thing about David Avella that you don't know is I get a text from David about every morning about where he is, and he has set a new record, a personal record. David, tell us about your new hobby.
My Peloton bike. In 3 days, I will have exercised every day for half the year.
And that's incredible. And I saw David recently this last week, and he had brought a bunch of the leaders throughout the country together very safely in Alexandria, and it was a great program. But we heard from some of our nation's top advisors to the president, and they talked about, Larry Kudlow talked, we just a great round of tickets, speakers that you brought in to talk a little bit about what's going on today in our world. And you know, big event, Vice President just picked his running mate, Harris, and we're all trying to understand what that means and how it plays out. Curious what your views are on that.
Not surprising if you think about Joe Biden spent his entire career in the U.S. Senate and has a high regard for U.S. senators. So in some ways, it's not surprising. Congratulations to Kamala Harris for the personal achievement of being selected. Though for Americans who are concerned about someone being an advocate for the Green New Deal and green jobs, and for raising taxes on small businesses, and for all those agenda items the progressive left is seeking, she's been a champion of those. And so if those are what you are concerned, if those issues aren't what you're looking for, then Trump-Pence is the way to go.
So the field is set, and you guys do a lot of work working with state and federal elected officials, training them, educating them on issues, bringing in top speakers, and all those sort of things. So you're a native of West Virginia, but you live in Northern Virginia, and so you're up where you don't have real Republican representation, but you're certainly involved in the Commonwealth and a bunch of other key races. How do you see the congressional races rolling out in Virginia this year with regard to Trump? Are they tied to Trump? If Trump loses, they lose, or what do you forecast? And you have a real good breadth of what's going on around the nation because you've talked to all these and help support all these great candidates that are getting nominated. What are you hearing?
Well, there's no question that the presidential race impacts every congressional race and every race on the ballot. And in Virginia, there are two opportunities for Republicans to pick up seats in the U.S. House. You have Nick Freitas in the second, or in the seventh, and you have Scott Taylor over in the second, former congressman who was defeated in 2018, working to make a comeback in 2020. both districts the Trump campaign will be competing in. And so they give us two wonderful opportunities to pick up seats, just as around the country. You look down in South Carolina where Nancy Mace, the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, is running in South Carolina's 1st District. Nicole Maliotakis up in New York 11, and Andrew Garbarino in New York 2nd Congressional District. So I say that to say districts you might not think Republicans would be competitive in. In fact, there are strong Republican candidates running, and that's good for the whole ticket, not only the president, but also down ballot, because while certainly the top of the ticket affects the lower offices that are on the ballot, there's also the up ticket, which is, folks get to know their state rep candidates and they know their state Senate candidates personally. And they're going out, and their friends in their network are going out to vote for their friend running for state legislature or mayor, and that helps the top of the ticket as well. So we have a strong ticket across the country, and we're ready. We're now ready to do battle with the Democrats. They have their ticket now complete. We have our ticket, and bring on November.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, especially about where we are in Virginia with regard to pickups and messaging. And, we talked, I had Nick Freitas on the previous segment before you joined us, and I'm not sure if you were able to listen to it, but we talked briefly about some of the things that we talked about making, what those First Virginians wanted was to make our lives easier, better, and safer. And I don't think that message has changed. And I think Republicans are carrying that, especially when you look at the country as a whole and Democrat bastions of liberalism have just taken over. And you look at in Oregon and the standoff they had there, and Seattle and Chicago and New York. Now, we were listening to the news this morning. They've had more shootings in New York than they've had in I don't know how many years. And so how do you think that plays out? And then, as we kind of get towards the end of the hour here, I have a couple more questions I want to hit you, but how do you think what's going on with regard to the BLM and all these other things, the uncertainty and the rioting and the looting, and how does that play out, and how does that affect, suburban moms?
It certainly is a concern. Polling would tell us that voters are concerned about it. It is not, though, what is driving the vote for undecided voters and those who are still persuadable. You're looking at health care and the economy driving people's concerns, whether that health care be COVID or whether that health care concern being have access to a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare facility, and then the concern about the status of their job, people's jobs, or needing a job. Certainly, the job numbers are encouraging, but we have a long way to go, which is why a Biden-Harris ticket has to be concerning, because you look at Joe Biden's plan, he wants to raise taxes on those individuals out there trying to create jobs, those small businesses, those Main Street mom and pop shops. He wants to raise taxes on them. That's not the way, as we've seen historically, how jobs get created. And so as now that we're in some ways almost the home stretch here, between the two national tickets, whoever best articulates ideas for granting access to health care and creating jobs, that's who will win in this election.
Well, listen, I agree with that. My concern is, we've talked, healthcare is still ranking up there, but for me and the folks that I talk to, especially some of the moms that are out there, that healthcare aspect of, are they going to be safe? When do they go back to school? How does that look like so I can actually get back to work? And I do think that's going to take real leadership. Switching topics just a little bit, GOPAC's mission is to educate leaders and getting them elected, and GOPAC has done a tremendous amount of work to help with that, to win a lot of majorities in state houses across the country. In fact, I would say GOPAC was probably number one in a lot of areas. I know certainly GOPAC played last year in the Virginia races for a few of us that were in very tight seats. Saying that, how does the average citizen, and a lot of our listeners, get retied into GOPAC? Because I know a lot of my colleagues that are legislators, we used to get the tapes and we used to hear all the education parts, and all that's kind of shifted to podcast, and we watch you on Fox and all the Bill Maher and all the other shows that you've been on in spreading the message. But how can we as citizens help GOPAC with their mission to educate and elect new generation of leaders? How do we give? Can we give online and those sort of things?
Sure. If you go to GOPAC Elect, GOPACelect.org, GOPAC Elect, and if inclined to invest in our mission, we are angel investors, as I like to say, looking around the country at where we can put resources into a race to help in a race that's competitive and bring a Republican victory home, give that Republican the final boost he or she needs to be victorious. And so for those out there listening who want to elect Republicans, a great way to do that is invest in GOPAC, GOPACelect.org, knowing that your contribution is going to help elect Republicans.
Well, I
in
can
competitive races.
No, absolutely, and I know you look at the numbers. And here's another fact: probably many people don't know that. As a native of West Virginia, you sought office one time too, and I think you have something to say about when you ran for office. I think you had a little quote.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I have a great respect for those who run for office. In fact, if my doctor ever told me I only had 6 months to live, I'd want to do them running for office, because those were the longest 6 months of my life.
Well, listen, I think another big concern is you see all these organizations and you start looking and delving into their financial paperwork, and you find out that you got guys like George Soros and some of these other multi-millionaires / billionaires funding these 24/7 organizations that do nothing but boots on the ground and doing that. How does the Republican Party under Trump, how do they put it all together, and how do we get other states together? We're going to have a convention on Saturday to elect a new chairman for the Republican Party of Virginia, but I think the party sometimes each their own, and they're disjointed, and how do we bring all that together? What's your viewpoint on that, and how does that all come together?
Well, certainly finding a candidate that you really inspires you and you want to support, getting involved directly for a candidate is an outstanding way to do that. Beyond that, the national party and the Trump campaign certainly are organizing a grassroots effort, getting involved in the presidential campaign, whether that be through the National Committee or whether that be through the RPV, the Republican Party of Virginia. The state party has a grassroots organization, but there are many ways to be active. And bringing it back, though, as one who is always working with leaders directly, volunteering directly for the candidate that you like the most is the best way to get involved, whether that be the Trump campaign or whether it be your candidate for county commissioner or sheriff or state house. Find a candidate that you're really inspired by and go volunteer.
Well, David, how do you manage your schedule? I mean, you are a busy guy. You've got young children at home. Your wife is also part of the political process, working with senators up in D.C. And I kind of am in awe of you some days, because you get up at the crack of dawn, before it's even daylight, you do your 1,000 miles on your Peloton bike, and you beat all these young NFL guys and everybody else on there, and then you have time to write opinion pieces. And I know you just dropped an opinion piece, and it's on townhall.com. Your prediction, election 2020, a republic if you can keep it. And how do you find the time to do all these things? I know you were in the Wall Street Journal and all these other publications, and how do you keep it all together? How do you and Claire keep it together?
We are fortunate to have a good team of people that we both work with our respective organizations, and Claire's company having a wonderful staff is key to it. Lots of prayer, and I still keep praying for an 2 extra hours in a day, but Lord hasn't given me that one yet.
Well, tell me what's next for GoPack. Tell me what's next for you, and when can our viewers see you again? I know you're constantly on all these programs and books and all these other things that you're doing. So what's next for David Avella and GoPack?
Tomorrow I'll be on Harris Faulkner at 1 o'clock hour, and then joining John Scott on Sunday and the Fox Report on the 6 o'clock hour. So I appreciate the opportunity to get to plug those two segments. And as for GoPack, as we've been talking during this segment, we are ultimately working to get Republicans elected this cycle, and both at the federal and at the state level, getting state legislators elected across the country, but also state legislators who are running for Congress now, 20 races around the country that we'll be investing in, trying to help them move from their state legislature up to serving in the U.S. Congress. And GoPackElect.org is the place where listeners can get more information.
Well, listen, I know that you are heading out the door. We were lucky to get you for this segment and this time frame, and I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for those of us who serve in the legislature, especially through the education part of policy as it happens. You briefly touched on the health care a little bit, but we certainly could spend all the segments on that when you really talk about some of the things that have to happen in order for healthcare to actually get back to where it is. And we talked about it's not about insurance, but access, and where are those doctors and how do we get access to them and all those sort of things amongst this whole plethora of legislation that's out there that's been dropped. One other question before we go, it just kind of a burning thing. You've had the opportunity to speak with the president, and what are your thoughts about President Trump? And you can give me personal, or you can give me political, but where do you think we are with them?
We have a president who, on policy, has built a economy that was the envy of the world, can do it again, because he focused on keeping taxes to a minimum on those creating jobs and putting more money in employees' pocketbooks, and also cut regulations. And what did that do? That got a economy heated up that required employers to compete for employees, which
Right.
did what? It raised wages. It got companies going back and offering benefits that maybe they had gotten rid of as they tried to get good employees. So you have a president who has created a strong economy that can do it again, that has protected America's interest around the world, has put a record number of conservative judges in the judicial system. I mean, for conservatives, go right down the line, every policy that we have fought for over the last decade, President Trump has made checkmark success on or making progress on.
Right.
And that, as you go into the election, is what voters are going to have to look at, the progress that we have made in many key areas during the last 4 years, and between the two candidates, which one can get the economy moving the fastest back to where we were, that's the decision. And if under that scenario, the decision's pretty easy. President Trump.
Well, let's hope that most Americans, Virginians that are listening, are reasonable, prudent people, and they can really cut through all the stuff that's out there that's been spread, that's political, and really look at what the policies are, because I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, David, thank you so much for coming on this morning.